Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a wrap-up of my reading for the Trans Girl April Readathon, which was hosted by Kevvie at Say Kevvie and Willow at Books and Bow. I'll leave information in the description box below about it in case you're interested. I read so many amazing books in April by trans authors, and I just cannot wait to share with you sort of a wrap-up of all of these and how I did on the bingo board. It was a fantastic reading month. So first, let me talk about the books that I finished that were on my TBR. I had 5 books that were on my TBR, and I did try all of them, although I only finished 4 of them. So the first that I finished was Bad Girls by Camila Sosa Villada, translated from Spanish by Kit Maude. This is kind of an auto fiction that is a trans woman coming of age story about a young woman who becomes a sex worker and her other trans women sex worker friends, the sort of community that they build, and just all of these different sort of separate little incidences that happen, and the kind of trauma that they've gone through, as well as a lot of the joy and community and self-actualization. It's really well written. It is very traumatic at parts, but it is just very worth picking up. Oh, and this satisfied the prompt of fiction by a trans woman. Next, I read I Hope We Choose Love by Cheng Thom, which is a nonfiction sort of essay collection with some poetry mixed in, talking about various issues within the queer community, especially the activist community. This was just really fascinating, just all of the different topics that were discussed, a lot of the different ideas and sort of the conflicts that are negotiated. And this is very much something where it's not arguing about issues in the mainstream, it's very much talking about what happens within the queer activist community. I thought that a lot of these essays actually really informed my understanding of some of the other works by trans authors that I read this month, so it's very well worth picking up. There's a lot to learn from this, and this satisfied the prompt of nonfiction by a trans woman. Then I reread one of my favorite books, Light from Uncommon Stars by Ryka Aoki, which is a science fantasy about really 3 women. One who is a trans girl runaway that is a violin prodigy who gets taken under the wing of a violin teacher who has made a deal with a demon to turn over the souls of 7 violin students, and this is the 7th, as well as the love interest for that violin teacher, who happens to be an alien refugee from an intergalactic war who has escaped with her family to Los Angeles to run a donut shop. It is a completely wild story. I love the writing in this. It's fantastic. There's a lot of humor, but also a lot of heavier issues discussed. It's got beautiful writing about food and about music, and just very feminist in its approach. I absolutely love it. I do have a review for this, so I'll link that down below. And this satisfied the prompt of genre fiction by a trans woman. And then lastly, from my TBR, I read Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. This is the prequel to Pet, which I had really loved, and follows the main character in Pet, Jam, her mom, Bitter. And so it follows Bitter in this town, Lucille, where things are very unjust. There's a lot of inequity and a lot of protests against that, even though there is police violence in response. But Bitter just wants to make art, just wants to be safe, and doesn't know how to deal with, you know, all of her friends being these big activists when all she wants to do is just be safe. And when some of the activism stuff gets even more intense, she has to kind of decide where she stands and what she wants to do. I loved the themes in this of just activism and kind of how you be an activist and the power of art and all these sorts of things. But this book was really intense. There's a lot of high action, high drama, violence, just very intense emotions, that sort of thing, which isn't so much my style. It's quite different from Pet, the other book in this series, but I think that the ideas are great. So if you like those sorts of things, it could work out really well for you. And this satisfied the prompt of genre fiction by a non-binary author. So then, in addition to the books that were on my TBR, I ended up picking up 8 other books that were not on my TBR, but that I'm so glad that I got to. So let's start with Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian by Hazel Jane Plante. So this is a book about a woman who is mourning the loss of, her really, really close friend who she's realizing that probably she also was in love with, and struggling to process those emotions. And so she decides to write this sort of book that is focusing on a TV show, Little Blue, that her friend Vivian had adored, that was a very wild show, and make sort of her own encyclopedia entries about that, as well as about her memories of Vivian. And so it's this way of processing that grief and celebrating the life of Vivian, along with all of these really interesting facts. It's kind of like mockumentary style, where there's so much detail to all of this, even though none of it is true. I had such a fun time reading it. It has a little bit of whimsy, but it also just has this joy of celebrating, this trans woman's life. So it was a really lovely read. Then I read The Gods of Tango by Carolina de Robertis, which is historical fiction set in the early 1900s in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and follows an Italian immigrant from Italy who is a trans man but grew up as a woman and moved to Argentina as a woman, and then discovered that if he wanted to kind of survive, he really needed to be a man because there weren't very many options open to women. And he loved tango and loved the violin, and that was something that he could play only as a man. But once he made this transition, he found that this was just exactly the life he wanted to live. And so it's all about just this coming of age, sexual awakening, this passion for tango and for music and for sex and for all sorts of things. It is a beautifully written story that has this rich historical background to it that I absolutely loved. And this satisfied the prompt of fiction by a non-binary author. Next is King and the Dragonflies by Kacen Callender. This is a contemporary middle grade about a boy who is mourning the loss of his older brother, dealing with that grief, while also dealing with some bigger issues that are happening in his town, some racism and homophobia, and trying to figure out what he feels about all of these. It's sort of this queer coming of age, queer awakening. It's also dealing with issues of kind of toxic masculinity and just dealing with bullying and all of these sorts of things. It's a really moving story that has so much heart, and you see this little boy trying to deal with all of these big issues, and the relationship between him and his parents is really core in this story. So yeah, I thought this was also just such a fantastic read. This counts as fiction by a non-binary author. Next, I read 10 Steps to Nanette by Hannah Gasdby. I listened to this on audiobook, which I highly recommend. This is a memoir of Hannah Gasdby's life, and in particular kind of looking at what led up to their Netflix special Nanette, which kind of took the world by storm. And it's about them growing up in Tasmania, Australia, as a queer kid, and just the homophobia that was so rampant at that time, and how that affected them, as well as learning later in life that they were autistic, and sort of how difficult that had made their life and the ways that they needed to cope. This is just a really powerful memoir. It's got a lot of humor as well as a lot of trauma, and it's just such a great listen. This counts as the nonfiction by a non-binary author prompt. Then I read There Are Trans People Here by H. Melt, which is a poetry collection about sort of trans experiences and community and futures. The poetry in this is absolutely lovely, and the way that Melt sort of imagines spaces and futures for trans people in this is just very, very powerful. So I really enjoyed this poetry collection. Poetry, I'm never really sure what this counts as in terms of genre, but I believe most people classify poetry as nonfiction. So this will satisfy the prompt of nonfiction by a non-binary author. Next, I read The Merry Spinster by Daniel M. Lavery, which is a collection of short stories that are retellings of classic tales. So things like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, but also The Velveteen Rabbit, Wind of the Willows, these sorts of stories. These stories have a really dark edge to them. They're very creepy and kind of grim at times, but also they have a lot of dark humor integrated into them and kind of a feminist feel to a lot of the stories. They are very well written, but very dark. But if you like that kind of thing, definitely pick this up because I thought that they were really well written. This satisfies the prompt of genre fiction by a trans man. Next is The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill, which is a middle grade fantasy graphic novel that has absolutely lovely artwork. I really love Kay O'Neill's artwork, and this one just had so much of it. It was really gorgeous. The story is about a teenager who becomes an apprentice moth keeper, which is really important to the community because the moths kind of pollinate this flower that has magical pollen that everybody uses. But being a moth keeper requires being out in the desert alone, and that loneliness is very hard to handle. So it's all about this sort of figuring out what you want to do in life. The story itself is a little sparse and a little slow, but the artwork in this is just so fantastic. This satisfies the prompt of genre fiction by a non-binary author. And lastly, I've got The Heartbreak Handshake by J.R. Hart, which is a contemporary romance novel set in a very cozy setting, this town Clover Hill, which is very artistic and queer friendly. And we follow two people, one an autistic man who is very friendly with his neighbors, but one of his neighbors keeps trying to set him up. And when her non-binary kid comes back to kind of stay with them for a little while, the mom sets them up, and they both don't really want to get involved in a relationship, especially because the kid is an artist and wants to travel around to different craft shows and sell their things, but they end up doing this fake dating thing that really turns into real feelings and emotions. This is an ace romance, and so it's zero heat, but there is so much kind of just sweet, gentle romance in this that was a real joy to experience. So if you like romance, I say give this one a try. This satisfied the prompt of genre fiction by a non-binary author. Okay, so those are all of the things that I read for Trans Girl April. I read so much more than I expected I would get to, and I had such a fun time reading these. I read so many things by authors that I'd read before that I had wanted to read more from. I read so many things that I'd heard recommended by friends, discovered new authors. It was just such a fantastic reading month. And my bingo board at the end of this, it looks like this. And I didn't, quite get all of the squares, but I got a good chunk of them. I'm really, really pleased with everything that I got read, and I'm just also pleased with a lot of the kind of takeaways that I got from this. There was so much in a lot of these books about queer community and queer mentorship and about that kind of push and pull between wanting to be who you are, but dealing with the realities of the world. It was just such a great experience to read so many trans books all next to each other. I had such a fun time with this readathon. So if you guys also participated in this, let me know. I would love to hear what you read and what worked out for you, or if you've read any of the books that I talked about or if you're interested in them, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.